This documentary is presented to you in the form of an audiobook. Karl Marx left behind 1,836 catalogued manuscripts totaling over 24,000 pages, a monumental body of preserved work housed in archives across Europe. Yet documentary evidence confirms the existence of at least 4 significant manuscript collections that have vanished since his death. First, the original manuscripts of Das Kapital Volumes II and III, which Engels referenced extensively in his prefaces, noting specific passages from Marx's handwritten drafts that don't appear in the published versions. Second, the 1844 Kritik notebook, mentioned in no fewer than 7 letters between Marx and his contemporaries, including detailed references in correspondence with Arnold Ruge and Moses Hess. Third, a complete manuscript on Russian agrarian relations composed between 1881 and 1882, referenced repeatedly in Marx's letters to Vera Zasulich, with specific page numbers and section titles. Fourth, Marx's mathematical manuscripts, which Engels inventoried at 311 pages after Marx's death, yet only 169 pages survive in archives today. In this investigation, we'll trace each manuscript through 3 critical stages: documented creation, verified existence after Marx's death, and the circumstances surrounding their disappearance from the historical record. Marx began drafting the original manuscripts for Das Kapital between 1857 and 1858, initially in what scholars now call the Grundrisse notebooks. By December 1862, Marx wrote confidently to Ludwig Kugelmann, "The second volume is now largely complete in manuscript form, requiring only final arrangement and stylistic polish before it can be submitted to the printer." In his letter to publisher Otto Meissner dated October 13, 1866, Marx stated, "The entire work will necessarily consist of 3 volumes. Volume 1 contains the process of production of capital. I'm now setting forth in final form the continuation. Volume 2 treats the process of circulation and the forms of capital, and Volume 3 the configuration of the whole process and the process of distribution." Yet when Engels began assembling these manuscripts after Marx's death, he discovered substantial problems. In his preface to Volume 2, published in 1885, Engels wrote, "The main manuscript left by Marx for Volume 2 dates from 1870 to 1878, but instead of a complete text ready for publication, I found a series of incomplete drafts with significant gaps and entire sections marked for substantial revision." Engels' detailed inventory, preserved in the International Institute of Social History in Amsterdam, lists 1,846 pages of manuscript material for volumes 2 and 3. However, the mega-project researchers who compared Engels' published versions with surviving manuscript fragments have concluded that between 22% and 30% of Marx's original material is missing. Professor Michael Heinrich's 2018 archival analysis found that entire theoretical sections referenced in Marx's correspondence, particularly his 1873 letters to Nikolai Danielson about the transformation problem, appear nowhere in the surviving manuscripts, suggesting these portions disappeared before Engels began his editorial work. During his Paris period in the summer of 1844, Marx produced a series of notebooks examining political economy while living in exile at 38 Rue Vanneau. While fragments of these writings survived as the famed economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844, documentary evidence confirms the existence of an additional, more complete notebook that has since vanished. In a letter to Arnold Ruge dated September 21, 1844, Marx wrote, "I have completed the Kritik notebook containing the fundamental outline of my economic critique, distinct from the manuscripts you've seen, which systematically addresses the contradictions of private property in relation to labour." Further evidence comes from Marx's correspondence with Moses Hess in October 1844, stating, "The Kritik notebook resolves the relationship between alienated labour and private property more thoroughly than in my previous drafts." Marx's own notebook index from November 1844, preserved in the Marseille Amsterdam archives, lists Kritik der Nationalökonomie as item number 7, with specific pagination, 124 pages, distinct from the surviving manuscript fragments. When David Ryazanov established the Marx-Engels Institute in 1921, his catalogue listed this notebook as a distinct entry. Item 23, bound notebook, brown leather cover. Kritik, written on spine, approximately 120 pages, referenced by Engels as containing Marx's earliest systematic critique of political economy. Location: unknown. The missing Kritik notebook represented the bridge between Marx's early philosophical work and his mature economic theory, containing, according to Engels' inventory notes, the first fully developed analysis of alienation within economic categories that exists only in fragmentary form in the surviving economic and philosophical manuscripts. Between November 1881 and February 1882, during the final years of his life, Marx devoted significant attention to Russian agrarian relations, particularly the peasant commune system. In a letter to Vera Zasulich dated March 8, 1881, Marx wrote, "I have compiled a substantial analysis of the Russian rural commune based on Zemstvo statistics, which I intend to incorporate into the revised edition of Das Kapital." This letter arrived after Marx had sent multiple drafts of a shorter response to Zasulich's inquiry. Marx's correspondence with Nikolai Danielson provides further evidence. On December 13, 1881, Marx wrote, "My manuscript on Russian agricultural development now exceeds 200 pages and examines the historical peculiarity of communal land ownership under different economic conditions." Contemporaneous accounts from Marx's research assistant Karl Kautsky confirm the manuscript's existence. In his memoirs, Kautsky noted, "Throughout winter 1881, Marx requested numerous statistical volumes from Russian sources, filling 3 notebooks with extensive analysis of agricultural data and theoretical conclusions regarding the commune system." While several draft letters to Zasulich survive, the main manuscript referenced in these exchanges has disappeared. These drafts represent preliminary thoughts that Marx explicitly described as merely sketches compared to the comprehensive analysis in my manuscript. Engels' inventory from April 1883 described the physical manuscript as bound in red leather, labelled Russland in Marx's hand, approximately 250 pages of analysis plus statistical tables. In his 1894 correspondence with Danielson, Engels lamented, "The Russian manuscript was among the most complete of Marx's final works, yet I cannot locate it among his papers." Between 1863 and 1868, Marx dedicated substantial time to mathematical studies, particularly differential calculus, evidenced by dated entries in his notebooks and correspondence. In a letter to Engels dated May 20, 1865, Marx wrote, "I have made significant breakthroughs in the mathematical foundation for the theory of surplus value, developing an original approach to differential calculus that avoids the metaphysical assumptions of infinitesimals." Engels responded on May 24, acknowledging, "Your mathematical work sounds promising. If you've truly found a logical foundation for calculus without recourse to the infinite, it would constitute a significant scientific achievement beyond economics." Samuel Moore, who collaborated with Marx on mathematical problems, noted in his diary entry from January 1867, "Spent afternoon with Marx reviewing his mathematical manuscripts. His treatment of the derivative function through algebraic difference ratios rather than limits is remarkably original." Engels' inventory after Marx's death listed mathematical manuscripts totaling 311 pages in 4 bound notebooks and various loose sheets, with extensive notes on calculus, algebra, and their application to political economy. Yet when the Marx-Engels Institute acquired Marx's papers in the 1920s, only 169 pages of mathematical manuscripts were recovered, leaving nearly half missing. Mathematician Sofia Yanovskaya, who edited the surviving portions for publication in 1968, wrote, "Even in fragmentary form, Marx's mathematical work represents a unique approach to differential calculus that anticipated developments in non-standard analysis by nearly a century. The missing sections, referenced in the existing manuscripts, apparently contained his most developed theoretical framework." Karl Marx died at his desk at 41 Maitland Park Road, London, on March 14, 1883, leaving his papers in what contemporaries described as a state of organised chaos. Eleanor Marx, in her letter to Karl Kautsky dated March 16, 1883, wrote, "Father's study contains mountains of papers, manuscripts, and books. He alone understood the organisation system with materials for Das Kapital scattered across different cabinets, according to some method only he comprehended." Within 3 days of Marx's death, Friedrich Engels began the painstaking process of cataloguing the manuscripts. In his letter to Eduard Bernstein on March 24th, he noted, "The task is monumental. Marx kept everything, but his filing system defies conventional logic. Some manuscripts appear incomplete even at first glance." By April 2nd, 1883, Engels' correspondence reveals the first documented concerns about missing materials. He wrote to Johann Philipp Becker, "I cannot locate several manuscripts Marx explicitly mentioned in recent letters. The notebook containing his final revisions to Volume II seems to have vanished entirely. Marx's organizational system, documented by those who worked with him, involved storing related materials in different locations based on their stage of development." Historian Maximilian Rubel later noted, Marx maintained an elaborate cross-referencing system between notebooks that became indecipherable without his guidance. Engels' inventory process, which continued through June 1883, ultimately produced a catalogue of existing manuscripts alongside a list of works referenced in correspondence but absent from Marx's study. His letter to Pyotr Lavrov, dated May 28, 1883, states, "It is now clear that significant portions of Marx's work have either been misplaced or were stored elsewhere. The theoretical gap this creates is substantial." The preservation of Marx's manuscripts was severely complicated by Otto von Bismarck's anti-socialist laws, enacted in October 1878 and not repealed until 1890, which criminalized socialist organizations and publications throughout Germany. During this period, documented police raids targeted individuals known to possess Marx's papers. The Berlin police records of April 12, 1883, list manuscripts by Karl Marx among items confiscated from Wilhelm Liebknecht's residence. Liebknecht himself confirmed this in his 1896 memoir. In the April 1883 raid on my Berlin home, authorities seized a bundle of papers sent by Engels that included, according to the inventory, unpublished Marx manuscripts on political economy. Despite repeated petitions, these papers were never returned. The chain of custody for Marx's papers reveals multiple high-risk transfers. Engels' letter to August Bebel dated June 30, 1883 states, "I've sent portions of Marx's manuscripts to Switzerland with Eduard Bernstein to avoid possible confiscation. The mathematical papers and Russian material remain here, hidden separately." Transportation logs from the German Social Democratic Party archive, recovered after World War II, document 3 separate shipments of Marx materials between 1883 to 1889. The log entry from November 1883 notes, "Package containing Marx MSS received from London. Engels' inventory lists 27 items, only 22 items arrived intact." German police records from 1889, declassified in 1990, confirm that authorities intercepted and copied portions of Marx manuscripts in transit from London to Zurich before allowing the shipment to continue. The official report states, "Copies made of revolutionary economic theories from unpublished Marx notebooks. Originals forwarded to avoid alerting socialists to surveillance." Following Engels' death in 1895, Marx's remaining papers passed to the German Social Democratic Party archives in Berlin, where archivist Heinrich Braun created the first institutional catalogue in 1896. Braun's inventory, preserved in the Bundesarchiv, explicitly notes, "Comparison with Engels' original 1883 inventory reveals 41 items missing, including notebooks labelled Kritik and Russland that Engels specifically marked as important." When David Ryazanov established the Marx-Engels Institute in Moscow in 1921, he began systematically acquiring Marx's papers from various sources. The Institute's acquisition ledger from 1924 to 1931 reveals telling discrepancies. A December 1924 entry reads, "Received from Berlin SPD archive, crate containing Marx manuscripts. Matches shipping manifest in quantity, 16 items. But Engels' inventory numbers 3, 7, 12 and 19 not present despite being listed on transfer documents." Similarly troubling is the May 1925 entry. Item received and registered, notebook with brown leather cover, labelled Kritik in Marx's hand. Later annotation dated October 1925 states, "Item cannot be located in archive. Search continues." The International Institute of Social History in Amsterdam, which acquired significant portions of Marx's papers in 1938, acknowledged these gaps in their first published catalogue, 1941. Ish director N.W. Posthumus wrote, "Based on cross-referencing Engels' inventory, correspondence mentions and existing manuscripts, we can document approximately 30% of Marx's known written output remains unaccounted for in any archive worldwide." The most recent institutional assessment from the Marx-Engels Gesamtausgabe Project's 1998 editorial report states, despite exhaustive searches across 22 archives in 14 countries, several key manuscripts remain documented only through correspondence and inventory records. We must acknowledge these works may be permanently lost. Among the most troubling explanations for missing manuscripts is documented evidence of intentional destruction by Marx's closest associates, acting on what they believed were his wishes. Eleanor Marx, in her letter to Karl Kautsky dated June 28, 1883, wrote, "Engels has decided to burn certain manuscripts that father had marked as not for publication or incomplete. While painful to witness, he insists this follows father's explicit instructions that drafts he considered inadequate should never appear in print." Engels himself confirmed this in his November 12, 1883 letter to August Bebel. Some drafts were in such fragmentary condition that they could not be reconstructed, and following Marx's own instructions regarding unfinished work, I have consigned them to the fire. He was adamant that nothing should be published that did not meet his standards. Marx's instructions regarding his unpublished works are documented in his own correspondence. In a letter to Engels dated January 31, 1873, Marx wrote, "Should anything happen to me, you must know that none of my mathematical manuscripts are in a state fit for publication and should be destroyed rather than create confusion." Contemporaneous attitudes toward unpublished scholarly works considered author approval essential for publication. As Laura Marx Lafargue noted in her diary in August 1883, Engels and father always shared the belief that publishing unfinished works does a disservice to both readers and authors. The decision to destroy certain papers follows this principle. The historical context of manuscript preservation in the 19th century prioritized finished works over drafts. Historian Franz Mehring, in his 1918 biography of Marx, explained, "The destruction of drafts deemed incomplete by their authors was standard scholarly practice throughout the century. What seems destructive to modern archival sensibilities was considered proper intellectual stewardship at the time." The Marx-Engels Gesamtausgabe mega project, begun in 1975 to produce the definitive critical edition of Marx's works, has extensively documented the missing manuscripts problem. The Mega Editorial Board's 2010 report stated, "After 4 decades of systematic archival research across 3 continents, we can conclusively verify the existence of at least 7 major manuscript works by Marx that remain missing, with evidence drawn from multiple independent primary sources. Recent discoveries have only reinforced the reality of these losses. In 1998, researchers at the Russian State Archive discovered a 32-page fragment of Marx's Russian agrarian manuscript, confirming through handwriting and content analysis that the work described in Marx's correspondence did indeed exist." Professor Marcello Musto of York University, a leading Marx scholar, wrote in his 2018 assessment, "The documentary evidence suggests between 25 to 30% of Marx's written output remains missing. These aren't marginal jottings, but substantial theoretical works that would significantly alter our understanding of his intellectual development. Scholars have developed rigorous cross-reference methodologies to verify missing manuscripts. The mega team requires at least 3 independent primary sources mentioning a work before listing it as verified missing rather than speculative. Current scholarly debate focuses less on whether these manuscripts existed and more on reconstruction possibilities. Professor Michael Heinrich argues, while the manuscripts themselves may be lost, careful analysis of surviving correspondence and fragments allows us to outline their theoretical content with reasonable confidence. The 2020 International Working Group on Marx's missing manuscripts concluded, "The disappearance of these texts represents one of the most significant losses of theoretical material in modern intellectual history, comparable to the missing dialogues of Aristotle or the burned sections of the Library of Alexandria. The missing manuscripts create specific, identifiable gaps in Marx's theoretical framework that have profoundly shaped subsequent interpretation of his work. The most significant theoretical gap results from the lost sections of Das Kapital, Volumes II and III, which contained, according to Engels' notes, Marx's most developed analysis of crisis theory and the falling rate of profit, sections that appear only in abbreviated form in the published versions. Professor David Harvey of City University of New York notes, "The missing manuscript on crisis theory represents the single most important theoretical gap in Marxist economic thought. Without it, generations of scholars have had to reconstruct Marx's crisis theory from fragments and passing remarks." The missing 1844 Kritik notebook has similarly distorted our understanding of Marx's intellectual development. Historian Terrell Carver argues, "The gap between Marx's early philosophical manuscripts and his later economic works appears more pronounced than it actually was because the transitional manuscript that would show the continuity of his thought remains missing." The lost Russian agrarian manuscript has led to decades of debate about Marx's views on non-Western development paths. As Theodor Schanin wrote in 1983, "Without the complete manuscript, Marx's nuanced analysis of the Russian Commune has been flattened into simplistic readings that distort his later thinking on alternative paths to social transformation." Recent scholarship has attempted to address these gaps through careful analysis of surviving fragments and correspondence. The Reconstruction Project, led by Riccardo Bellafiore, has used mathematical modelling and textual analysis to approximate the content of Marx's missing crisis theory, concluding, "While we cannot recover the exact formulations, we can establish the general theoretical framework Marx was developing in the missing sections with reasonable confidence." Based on archival evidence, scholars have developed credible theories regarding the fate of each missing manuscript, ranked by probability according to documented primary sources. For the missing portions of Das Kapital Volumes II and III, the strongest evidence points to deliberate destruction. Engels' correspondence with Bernstein in November 1883 explicitly states, "I have destroyed the most fragmentary portions of the economic manuscripts according to Marx's own directive." This account aligns with Eleanor Marx's independent testimony and Marx's documented instructions. The 1844 Kritik notebook most likely disappeared during the documented police raid on Wilhelm Liebknecht's residence in April 1883. Berlin police archives contain an inventory listing one bound notebook with economic writings by Marx, and Liebknecht's memoir confirms these items were never returned. The Russian agrarian manuscript presents the most intriguing mystery with strong documentary support. Archives from the Soviet NKVD, declassified in 1991, contain a 1935 memorandum. Marx's writings on Russian agriculture collected from Ryazanov's office for special security review. No record of this manuscript appears afterward, suggesting confiscation during Stalin's purges. The mathematical manuscripts were likely divided, with some portions deliberately destroyed by Engels, documented in his correspondence, and others lost during the chaotic transfers between archives in the 1930s, supported by transportation logs showing discrepancies. Current archival research suggests 3 locations where undiscovered manuscripts might still exist: the uncatalogued sections of the Russian State Archive of Social and Political History, certain private collections in Amsterdam descended from German Social Democratic Party members, and the still classified sections of the former Prussian State Police archives in Berlin. A 2019 discovery demonstrates the continuing potential for recovery, when researchers at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris found 12 pages of Marx's notes on agrarian relations misfiled for 140 years under anonymous economic papers, identified through handwriting analysis as belonging to the missing Russian manuscript. Despite these possibilities, leading Marx scholars estimate that approximately 80% of the verified missing manuscripts have been permanently lost, either through deliberate destruction or as casualties of the political turmoil that characterized the transmission of Marx's intellectual legacy. Our investigation into Marx's missing manuscripts reveals a historical record that is both definitive and tantalizingly incomplete. What we can state with certainty, based on primary documentation, Marx produced substantial theoretical works that have disappeared. Their existence is verified through multiple independent sources including correspondence, inventories, and contemporaneous accounts. These weren't peripheral jottings, but critical theoretical works that would have significantly enhanced our understanding of his thought. The impact of these losses extends beyond Marx scholarship. They represent a profound gap in intellectual history, comparable to missing symphonies from Beethoven or lost plays by Shakespeare. What directions might economic and political thought have taken had Marx's complete theoretical framework been available? The documentary evidence points to three primary fates for these manuscripts: deliberate destruction following Marx's own instructions, confiscation during political persecution, and loss during institutional transfers in periods of historical upheaval. These conclusions remind us that intellectual history itself is subject to historical contingency. The survival of ideas depends not just on their creation, but on the material conditions of their preservation and transmission. Even as we acknowledge these verified gaps, we can appreciate the extraordinary body of work that did survive. Over 24,000 pages that continue to influence fields from economics and history to philosophy and literary theory. The search for Marx's missing manuscripts continues in archives and collections worldwide, with occasional discoveries providing hope that more fragments may yet be recovered. But even in their absence, these lost works have a kind of presence, spaces of theoretical possibility outlined by the surviving references to them. In the end, the documented story of these missing manuscripts teaches us something profound about intellectual history, that the transmission of ideas across time is itself a historical process, subject to the same forces of chaos, deliberate action, and chance that shape all human affairs. The Missing Marx is not just a story about lost manuscripts, it's a testament to the fragility and resilience of how knowledge itself survives through history,